In a forgotten village that lay between the dusty trails of the desert and the whispering mountains of the north, people spoke in hushed tones about a woman they called La Viuda Gigante, the giant widow, not because she had chosen the name for herself, but because fear has a way of giving people titles they never asked for, and hers was forged out of prejudice, pain, and misunderstanding, for she was taller than most men, broader in shoulders, her presence looming like a shadow in the marketplace, and because tragedy had once carved a permanent scar into her heart when she lost her husband in a storm that swallowed their small home by the river, leaving her to carry both grief and survival upon her back, people began to see her not as a woman of flesh and feeling but as a symbol of bad luck, misfortune, and even danger. Mothers would pull their children closer when she walked past, men would avert their eyes, whispers followed her like cruel ghosts, and she lived in silence at the edge of the town, building her life brick by brick, never asking for pity but never receiving kindness either, until the day an Apache warrior rode into town, a man with skin bronzed by sun and eyes like tempered fire, who carried himself not as one who sought conflict but as one who carried the weight of stories untold, and when he arrived, people both feared and respected him, for Apaches were known to be fierce, proud, and unbroken, and yet this man, whose name was Tenek, sought not to conquer but to trade, to share, and to learn. It was during one of these trades that he saw her, the so-called giant widow, standing in the corner of the marketplace, holding a small basket of handmade cloth that no one dared to buy, and in that moment something shifted, for while the rest of the village saw a figure to fear, he saw loneliness wrapped in strength, sorrow disguised as resilience, and eyes that had forgotten how to be met with tenderness, and he approached her, breaking the invisible line that everyone else had drawn, and in a voice steady yet soft he asked her about her craft, about her cloth, and about her life, and she, startled, nearly dropped the basket, for no one had spoken to her in such a way for years, and though her words stumbled at first, something within her softened, like a stone finally feeling rain, and she told him of the patterns she wove, each one a memory of her lost husband, each thread a prayer she never spoke aloud, and the Apache listened as though her words were sacred, nodding, not pitying but honoring, and for the first time in so long, she felt seen, not as a monster, not as a widow cursed, but as a woman with a heart that still beat, still longed, still dreamed. But the people around them grew uneasy, whispering louder, "Why does he speak to her? Does he not know she brings ruin? Does he not fear her?" And yet Tenek only smiled at her, ignoring the murmurs, and when she tried to withdraw, saying, "You should not be seen with me, for they will turn on you too," he shook his head and said, "Let them talk, I hear only your voice," and that small defiance was like a flame in her cold, dark cave of isolation. Over the weeks, he returned again and again, sometimes with trade, sometimes with stories, sometimes simply with silence that felt like company, and the more they spoke, the more the wall of fear around her began to crack, though the villagers resisted, treating her with even more suspicion as if her bond with the Apache was proof of their worst fears, and yet, unknown to them, love was quietly sprouting in the most unlikely soil, fragile but determined, like a wildflower pushing through stone. One day, when the whispers grew crueler and the village leader suggested driving her out once and for all, Tenek stood before them and said with a voice that carried both authority and warmth, "You see a curse, but I see courage. You see a shadow, but I see light," and when they laughed, mocking the idea that anyone could ever want her, he shocked them all by declaring, "Then if she is for sale as you treat her, I will buy her freedom from your cruelty," and the crowd gasped, for no one had ever spoken of her with such dignity, and before their stunned eyes, he walked to her, took her trembling hands, and whispered, "Will you marry me?" Time seemed to stop, her chest tightened, for she had believed her heart buried with her husband, and she shook her head in disbelief, whispering, "Why me? I am nothing but a widow they fear," but he answered, "Because you were strong enough to carry sorrow and still stand tall, because you were gentle enough to weave beauty even when life gave you pain, because I see you, not the names they throw, not the shadows they cast, but you," and tears, hot and unstoppable, ran down her face as she realized that love had found her again in the most impossible way, and in that moment she said yes. Not because she thought she deserved it, but because she finally believed she could choose happiness again, and though the villagers resisted at first, something in them began to change, for when they saw how Tenek treated her, with respect, with laughter, with devotion, they began to question the cruelty of their own hearts, and slowly, the giant widow became not a figure of fear but a symbol of transformation, proof that even the most despised could become cherished, that compassion has the power to rewrite the ugliest of stories. And on the day they wed under the wide sky, with only a few friends gathered, Tenek placed around her neck a simple necklace of woven thread, saying, "This is no chain, but a bond of choice, for love is never a prison but a freedom. We give each other," and she, holding his hands, felt lighter than she had in decades, as if the ghosts of sorrow had finally been released. Their marriage became a story whispered not in fear but in wonder, told to children as a lesson that love sees beyond scars, beyond sighs, beyond grief, and though not all accepted it at once, time softened even the hardest hearts, and years later, when children came to sit by her fire and listen to her stories, they no longer called her La Viuda Gigante with dread but with affection, for she was the woman who proved that no one is too broken, too feared, or too forgotten to be loved again, and in the end, her life stood as living testimony to the truth that what the world fears is often what it needs most: a heart brave enough to endure, and kind enough to forgive.